With such a long history as video games has today, you'd expect some urban legends to crop up over time. And boy, have there been some real doozies. Obviously, we all know a few legendary ones, such as the hidden character Sheng Long in Street Fighter 2, Tomb Raider's nude Lara cheat code, and Peter Molyneux was once capable of making decent games. But a lot of these have been out in the ether for so long, people simply take them as facts, when in truth, they're total bunkum. So, this episode, we take a look at these lascivious litanies, these philandering falsehoods, and these masquerading myths, as I say. But, hello you, I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. 5 infamous gaming urban legends debunked. When it comes to obvious gaming facts, you don't need to go much further than Mario. I mean, did you know that Mario was originally called Jumpman? Did you know that the Western version of Super Mario Bros. 2 was actually an unrelated game in Japan called Doki Doki Panic? And did you know that Bowser has a wife named Clawdia Koopa? All these facts are so bloody obvious, aren't they? Oh, wait a minute. Aren't they? Hasn't anyone else heard of Clawdia Koopa? I mean, Bowser's got all of his Koopaling children after all, so presumably he's got a wife. Well, there's some people who'd swear blind that Clawdia Koopa existed. After all, why wouldn't Bowser have a wife if he's got loads of children? But officially, nope. No such thing as Clawdia Koopa exists. Except for, apparently, in the pages of the UK edition of Nintendo Power. An unspecified issue of the magazine featured a comic, and said comic featured Bowser's wife, Clawdia. This, apparently, is a picture of her. The legend of Clawdia Koopa spread for years without anyone really looking into it in any detail. Which is a good thing considering even the slightest glance at it would cause a whole facade to crumble. After all, the only source for her existence is this comic strip in a UK issue of Nintendo Power that no one can actually remember. And that's quite possibly because of one specific thing. There never was a Nintendo Power in the UK. It might have been the most popular and best known Nintendo magazine of them all, but it was only ever published in the US and Canada. Now, there was an official mag for the Big N in the UK, but it was called Nintendo Magazine System, amongst loads of other names. Clawdia actually comes from an old Mario fan site named Lemmy's Land, and it appears as though the webmaster created her purely in order to use her in fan fiction. But as far as Nintendo goes, the King of Koopas has never had a wife. But what about all those children? All those Koopalings? Ludwig, Wendy-O, Larry and company? Well, obviously they exist, but that's the other urban legend that Clawdia Koopa's connected to. The Koopalings aren't Bowser's children at all. Well, that's what Nintendo says nowadays. Though all the many different games and translations of games and all the other bits of the Mushroom Kingdom's extended universe, the Koopalings have changed from Bowser's children to not Bowser's children so many times, they may as well have been dropped into the world by a bloody stork at this point. But, well, this ridiculous story of confused parentage is best saved for another video. Them's the breaks. Here's one that comes pretty hot off the press. If you've not been paying attention, you may be a bit flustered because surely everyone knows that Sonic the Hedgehog was originally named Mr. Needlemouse, right? That was one of the many different prototype names for the character, along with Mr. Hedgehog, LS, and Raizupi. The name Mr. Needlemouse has been going around for years, if not decades. It's literally right there on Naoto Oshima's concept art for the character. But in all that time, no one has ever thought to ask the original Sonic team folk, like Oshima, or indeed Yuji Naka, about it all. Mr. Needlemouse has been referenced many, many times, and not just in works of fan fiction or anything like that. It's been used, for example, as a plot device in official Sonic comics. Sometimes the Blue Bullet gets a bit of amnesia after bonking his head and starts referring to himself as Mr. Needlemouse. And it's even been officially used by Sega. While I'm sure not many of you want to be reminded of Sonic 4's existence, the working name for the project was, indeed, Project Needlemouse. So it's not like they weren't aware of it, it's just that there's this one person who wasn't at all. At the start of 2021, to celebrate 60 years of business, Sega conducted a public exam for fans in order to test their knowledge of the company. And one of the questions was, simply enough, what was Sonic's original name? Mr. Needlemouse, Mr. Speedy Mouse, Mr. Rocket Mouse, or Mr. Blue Mouse? The answer, obviously, is Mr. Needlemouse. But when someone tweeted a question at Yuji Naka himself, he was kinda surprised. As far as he was concerned, there wasn't ever a Mr. Needlemouse at all. And because of this, Yuji Naka himself amazingly managed to flunk his own company's test. In fact, Sonic's codename was always Mr. Hedgehog from the beginning. So where does Mr. Needlemouse even come from? Well, it's actually kinda simple. It's a mistranslation. The words Harry and Nezumi mean needle and mouse respectively, and that's what appears on Shima's piece of paper. If you translate those two words literally, you get Needlemouse. But if you put them together, you get Harry Nezumi, which in Japanese simply means hedgehog. That's it. That's all it ever was. For 30 bloody years, and that's why Yuji Naka got so confused. Hell, Mr. Needlemouse is so ingrained in people's minds that people will probably never stop calling Sonic that. But now you're one of the lucky few who's watched this video, you can pop up and say, actually, I think you'll find he was never called Mr. Needlemouse at all. And in the end, isn't that all that matters? Sonic? Sonic? Again? Surely we've already met our requirement to have one entry that's all about the blue blur, and we don't need another. Well, it turns out that over the years, quite a lot of misinformation, falsehoods and plain old wrong things have been spread about gaming's favourite Ultramarina Rhinocene, and they ought to be cleared up. We've just taken them as gospel for so long, without ever considering to ask anyone actually in the know whether they were true or not. This urban legend is all about the game that most consider to be the best Sonic of them all. Sonic 3 and Knuckles. A truly epic adventure over 2 cartridges, which I think we can all agree is matched only in the equally excellent likes of Sonic and the Black Knight and Shadow the Hedgehog. Now, before you start assuming, oh, it's going to be about that bloody did Michael Jackson do the music thing again, isn't it? Come on, you know me better than that. The answer is yes, he did, by the way. Nope, this segment is going to be about the more overlooked question of why the game ended up on 2 cartridges in the first place. Why the split? For a long time, the answer has been that Sonic 3 was just too big for a single cart, and so it was necessary to split it into 2. Now, a part of this is kind of true, as Takeshi Iizuka, then head of Sonic Team, has said Sonic 3 was very ambitious and way bigger than the other 2 put together, so it was taking a long time to make. But it could have been done on 1 cart. There were already games out, like Phantasy Star 4, which rocks enough mega power to be able to fit a game the size of the 3rd Sonic in fact. So it could have happened, even if it would have taken a fair bit more time. The major reason why Sega made the decision to split the game, in actual fact, was due to a lucrative ad campaign they agreed with McDonald's for February 1994, which they agreed to have a game, specifically the third Sonic, out in time for. It soon became clear that Sonic 3 as a whole wasn't going to be finished in time to meet the McDonald's promotion, so the decision was made to split the game and develop the lock-on technology that would ultimately form a complete title when Sonic and Knuckles came out later in the year. In the end, everyone's happy, and Sonic 3 gets its big time on the boxes of Happy Meals as planned. Apparently, the stock of 40 million toys made for the campaign was wiped out in under a fortnight, so it was certainly quite the success. So, in the end, well, it all came down to money. Bags and bags of the stuff. Enough of all these obscure games like Sonic and Mario. We know what you really want to hear out. You've all come here expecting to see an entry on Cooking Mama. You know, the Nintendo DS games where you play as a mama who cooks. And there's plenty of mini-games, usually the sort where you make frenzied zigzag movements with a stylus in such a way that it would probably create neat julienne strips out of your fingers if you did it in real life with a big old chef's knife. The 12 million or so copies the series has sold aren't exactly to be sniffed at, but the series has had its fair share of controversies over the years, and not just from reviewers who may consider it all a bit of casual fluff that's barely beyond the endless Imagine games. I mean, Peter hates it, for one. You could play Cooking Mama style games by them where our cruel mother becomes bloodthirsty and fueled by an insane lust for meat. But the big kerfuffle for this series came fairly recently, when Cooking Mama Cookstar was released for the Switch last year, and then was pulled from storefronts mere hours later. So, what happened? How could this innocuous game cause such a fracas? Well, rumours spread immediately that the game was, in actuality, a front for mining cryptocurrency, and that's why it got pulled. Naturally, doing such things would be against terms of service, and the accusation has plagued the game somewhat ever since. A few days into the story, however, it became clear that there wasn't any such crypto mining software in the game's back end at all at any point. The game may not be good, but it's not going to use your Switch to farm cyber money. So, how did this accusation come about? The fault appears to lie with a rather enthusiastic executive at Cooking Mama Cookstar's publisher, Planet Entertainment, who talked about how the game used blockchain technology when it was first revealed in 2019. Sounds like data mining talk. But in reality, well, he didn't know what he was talking about. He was just using techno buzzwords that he hoped would warm investors' cockles and get them to buy into the game. The much more boring reason for the game's pulling was a dispute between Planet and the game's IP holders in Japan, Office Create. And that's what screwed it over. In North America, at least. Not that anyone much liked Cooking Mama Cookstar to begin with. Well, except for Peter, who praised the game for including a vegetarian mode. So, whatever floats your boat. Some stories of game development are dramatic and epic in their own right, almost as appealing as the ones from the games themselves. They're stories that have become legendary even. They even come with an inspirational message that you shouldn't give up on making what you actually want to create. Such is the case with the original Final Fantasy on NES. Here we have Square, a Nintendo developer of some note, thanks to the odd game here and there like Rad Racer and what have you, but they hadn't made as much cash as they'd hoped, and business wasn't looking good. And so it was decided that Square would pour everything into an RPG that Hironobu Sakaguchi wanted to make called Final Fantasy. And the game was named that because it would almost certainly be Square's last title before going to the wall. They made it, they released it, It was a huge hit that turned the company's fortunes around, and the biggest JRPG franchise of them all born. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? It's something that brings a tear to your eye, and obviously, it's all complete and utter bollocks. Sorry. The title of Final Fantasy wasn't even what the game was originally going to be called. At first the game had the title of Fighting Fantasy, but that had to be changed because, as folks of a certain age may know, there was already a popular series of role-playing game books called Fighting Fantasy. So that name was right out. But the idea of having an alliterative name clearly appealed, and so another one had to be cooked up. Final Fantasy was simply the most obvious replacement. So, why does this story persist? Well, there's always been little half-truths here and there that kind of come together to make up this bucket of bunkum. Square were reluctant at first to make an RPG because they didn't think it would sell well, and they were indeed not particularly financially solvent at the time. But that isn't how Final Fantasy got its name. The other rumour was that Sakaguchi gave the game its name because he'd have quit the industry if it wasn't a hit. However, Sakaguchi himself has said all these different theories aren't that close to the truth, and that's really any word beginning with F would have been fine. Yes, any word. The game could have well just been called Flying Fantasy, or Forbidden Fantasy, or Forensic Fantasy, Flagellation Fantasy. You get the idea. Here at Fact Hunt, we always take pleasure in debunking the most poetic and inspirational game development stories. Especially the inspirational ones. In a bizarre turn of events, Fighting Fantasy, the intended name for Final Fantasy, was co-created by a certain Ian Livingstone, who would later form Eidos Interactive, who developed video game adaptations of Fighting Fantasy books, such as Death Trap Dungeon, which ultimately Squaresoft, now Square Enix, would later buy. So they now own a name they couldn't initially use. It's funny how things work out like that. Hello you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes. Click on the bell if you already are to make sure you're notified. And be sure to check out my other episodes. And if you want to be super awesome, check out my Patreon. But thanks again for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time. Ta-ra for now.